Okay. Number one, I say this all the time and people look at me kind of sideways. Users don't pay your salary. A business
That's a
does.
good point.
Okay. Users didn't decide to hire you. That business did. And the reason that they hired you, the reason they're giving you a paycheck every 2 weeks is to serve their interests. If you believe anything else, you're deluding yourself.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for joining me today on BlatzChatz.
Thank you for having me. The honor is completely mine.
Thank you so much. Before we dive into our conversation, I would love for you to tell us who you are.
Hmm. That's a loaded question. I'm a UX consultant, author, speaker, musician, jack of all trades, I suppose. And I've been doing all that for a very long time. I mean, I started out in graphic design way back in the 80s, worked for design firms, ad agencies. Then this little thing called the internet came along, the World Wide Web, as it were, and couldn't convince the old guys that ran this agency that the internet wasn't a passing fad, that, clients should pay attention to it. And they were like, whatever, kid, go make me coffee. So I was brave enough or dumb enough or naive enough or whatever to say, well, no, I'm going to design for the web. So I jumped ship and started with one employee, grew it to six, and decided that's what we were going to do. And right around that time, just luck, right? Experience design started to become a thing. User experience started to become a thing. For a lot of people, that was Don Norman. For me, it was Jesse James Garrett. And a lot of the stuff that Alan Cooper was talking about in terms of mostly UI design, but interaction design, right? That just, it lit my world on fire because the crossover between psychology and all this kind of stuff. And there was just no looking back. So along the way, independent practice plus the opportunity to teach online, which was my wife's idea. She said, there's this thing called Udemy. You might want to check it out. You've got 8,000 client presentations. Maybe you should upload one and see how this goes. And, you do that and it's a couple hundred, and it's 500, and it's 1,000. And then it's fast forward, I don't know how many years later, but I mean, at this point, between Udemy and my own platform, the UX 365 Academy, where I do group coaching and live training and self-serve training, we're at like 380,000 students total
Wow.
over time. I say that out loud partly just to give myself a little shot in the arm because I'm very hard on myself, and partly just because it's incredible to me. All right, it's incredible. There is no possible way I could have predicted any of this, And I've written books, obviously, along the way, which the latest user experience team of one with Leah Bewley for Rosenfeld Media is the latest. So I don't know. Who am I? I'm open to opportunity. I'm a person who believes that there's no wrong turns. I think that everything is worth trying and worth exploring. And if you have I don't know, the idea that you want to do something, you have a nagging thing that won't leave you alone. You think, I want to check that out. You go do it, fear or not.
I love that. And, Joe, I see you on LinkedIn and I see your posts, and the things that you post are so different than what I see a lot of postings on LinkedIn are about. And what makes you unique to me is that you're actually sending a positive message. You are not bitching about stuff.
I hope so, because I mean, honestly, that shit drives me crazy. Okay. It serves no purpose. Being negative and criticizing, I think I just posted something yesterday. If anything raises my blood pressure, it's this. Pointing fingers at other people, this trend of like shit posting. Well, young designers don't understand, and that if you don't do this, this, and this, that's not real UX. And like, what is the point of this? I'll give you a parallel. I have started a couple magazines in my life and a small book publishing company way back when. But with the magazines in particular, because we were reviewing art and music and poetry and all sorts of stuff. And myself and my first partner, Stuart Greenwell, felt like bad reviews make no sense. Like, why am I going to waste 10 minutes or 15 minutes or half hour of somebody's life reading about something that sucks? Like, why wouldn't you just turn them on to something that's positive, that's good, that's, hey, this is uplifting, it's going to change your life, it's, something you should check out, it's inspiring. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we wanted to put out into the world. And that to me carries across everything. I don't see any reason to open your mouth to be hypercritical. We've elevated constructive criticism into this place where like being negative is a badge of honor. Bitching is a badge of honor. And it's not. It's nothing of the sort. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody else. And it contributes to this overall feeling of doom and gloom and negativity. And I just, especially the older I get, I want none of it. So my job, as I see it, a big part of my job is to be an antidote to all that shit.
Yeah. I'll be honest, Joe, sometimes it's easier just to be negative and to bitch. So
Sure it is. Sure
I
it is.
almost think you have to get beyond that and have a little bit of, I don't know, self-reflection, revelation, whatever it might be, to be like, I'm going to be bigger and better than that.
Yeah, I think it's the only way to go forward. Okay. And I think you learn this in a number of ways. I think that has to do with how I was raised. I think it has to do with the lessons that my father tried to teach me my entire life. His thing was always like, look, whatever's happening is happening. Do the very next thing. Okay. Don't look too far behind. Don't look too far ahead. Do the very next thing. Right. When I met my wife, I mean, she's one of these people as well. It's like when something terrible happens, because if you're alive, you're going to get kicked in the teeth sooner or later. It's going to happen. And her whole thing is like, okay, great. It happened. What are you going to do about it? Right? You can spend the next hour, day, week, month lamenting what's going on. It changes nothing. What is within your power to do? Now, some things are bigger than you and you can't change everything. But you do have a choice in how you react to it. You do have a choice in how you exist in that moment. So you can give yourself the grace to say, this sucks and it hurts. At the same time, I think if you're going to do anything worth doing, if you're going to live a life that you like, that you can feel proud of, you got to move past that moment and say, all right, I got to find a way to turn this around or turn it into something more positive.
Right.
I
Right.
don't know, maybe that's naive. I don't know.
No, I think it's totally fair. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start walking again, right? You can't just lay there forever.
That's right. That's my one saving grace. People in interviews ask me all the time, what would you attribute to your success? Above everything else, I refuse to stay down. Sometimes it's no more than that. Sometimes all you got going for you is the ability to get up, because everything else is just a mess. It's like, what can I do? Well, I can get up.
Yeah. That and the strength sometimes that it takes to just get up is pretty big for some people.
Yes, it is. It's massive. It's massive. Like I said, in all manner of ways, you're going to get hit. I mean, that's life in general. And I take a lot of inspiration from people who have been through extraordinarily terrible things. History is littered with those stories. And you think to yourself, all right, if this person found the strength and the will to get up and keep going after that, my life has been a breeze compared to a lot of this stuff.
Right.
And I think, all right, if they could do it, there's no excuse for me. It's just how I think. I'm not saying everybody should think like that. That's just how I do my thing. It's part of what helps me keep going.
Yeah, that's really great. Again, I'll admit sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes I've been in that
Easy about it.
crying, moaning,
Sure.
but
Sure.
then you can't do that forever. What good is it going to do?
No. I mean, you even from a business perspective, right? I've rolled out plenty of things that have failed spectacularly. And you put all this work and all this effort and all this heart, quite frankly, because you care about it. This thing about it's not personal. Give me a break. Okay. It's personal. If you want to be good at anything, you have to care about it. And if you care about it, it is therefore personal. So you take it, pretty seriously when things fall flat on their face. So it happens. And it does sink your ship. There's no question about that. There's nothing easy about it. But wallowing makes it worse, in my experience. So I feel like if I've got a voice and people are paying attention to what I say, I need to be responsible with how I use that. So I would much rather put things out into the world that give people some hope. And I also say this because I coach a lot of UX folks, product design folks, product managers, copywriters, got a few developers here and there. It's part of the reason they wind up in this place where they're like, okay, well, it must be me. I can't do this job. I'm no good at this, because they're running into opposition at work, or they're unable to do the kind of work that they're proud of, or they're unable to institute any of these right ways to do UX, any number of things. But it makes people feel like failures and hurts. And that bothers me a great deal, because the suffering is unnecessary. People attribute circumstances that happen to them at work in particular as judgment of their ability or their worth or their talent. And nothing can be further than the truth. A lot of that shit has nothing to do with you. Nothing. Zero, zip. Those decisions have nothing to do with whether anybody does or does not respect what you do for a living. And people don't realize that, So that's all a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I feel like more of us, specifically those of us who've been around for a while, I think have a greater responsibility to choose our words a little more carefully.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to switch gears a little bit, Joe.
Sure.
I'm thinking about your book that just came out, the UX Team of One
Yep.
revisit book.
Yep.
I'll say it didn't just come out, but it just came out for me because I read it, I think, last month.
Yeah.
A lot of the themes that you just touched upon, right? You can't control some of the things at work, and it does feel personal, but don't take it personally. The first thing I thought about when I read this book, it's called The User Experience Team of One, is, no offense, but it's a horrible title. It's a misnomer.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Because I have been a UX team of one. I think that's probably when I read Leah's version years ago.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this is me. But really, I would say almost everything in that book is applicable, whether you are a team of one or a larger team. So what do you think?
It is. And it's funny because Marta, the editor, and I laughed about this a lot in that, and it's kind of a running joke at Rosenfeld as well, in that this book probably should have been called Everything You Ever Needed to Know About UX.
Right.
Right.
That would have worked better.
But the point of the original book with Leah is that, it was an antidote for people who are struggling. That was born out of a lot of stuff that she saw happening and said, look, there's got to be a better way to do all this. And here it is, right? Here's a more grounded, practical, down-to-earth approach. And what I like about the title still, though, is that not only if you're a team of one, and there are a lot of folks who are a team of one, okay, more than I think people realize. The other thing that is that even if you're not a team of one, I think a lot of times in this profession, we feel like a team of one. You feel like you're on your own. You feel like you don't have the same support at the same level, at the same quantity, volume, whatever, that a lot of the professions or positions do inside your company. So again, what attracted me to that book when it came out, right? When her original book came out, it was one of those books that I read and I'm like, man, I wish I'd written this. Yeah, seriously. And there's less than a handful of books that I've read that I felt that way about. And because it was real, it was like, let's cut the bullshit. Here's what works. Forget all the artifice, forget all the fancy stuff. Here's any number of ways to go about this. And you don't have to do them all. There's no requirement, right? Her whole thing about it, like, if you only remember one thing, if you only do one thing. I loved that. I still love it, obviously. So when Lou came to me and said, would you be interested in helping us get a second edition out? Before he finished the sentence, I was saying yes. Like absolutely, yes. Without question, because the whole of that book was right in line with everything that I believe. So I agree with you. I think it applies to anybody with any level of experience in any kind of situation. It's all practical. The world around us is messy. Corporate reality is messy. There's never enough time or approval or budget or personnel or whatever, access to users to go around. I think you need an arsenal of stuff, of tools, of techniques, of methods, of things that at any given moment you can draw upon and say, all right, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, but I could probably in the next half hour get this done, right? I could take this approach. I could learn these things. And my whole thing for anyone who's followed me is something is always better than nothing. So Yeah, I'm with you 100%. The title is a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah, this is one of my top 5 books, and whenever I tell
Wow.
somebody, they'll say, like, "What books should I get?" I'm like, "All right, there's this book, but the title is wrong." But it's still a great book. I don't care if you are all by yourself or you have 100 designers or, UX folks around you. Everything in this book is still very applicable regardless of team size.
I agreed. Completely agree.
Yeah. So I can't recall what year the original book came out, but what was some of the factors or motivations for why the book was updated?
Well, it was a decade plus ago when the original came out. The reason was a lot has changed in this profession. There's always been a speed to market emphasis in companies. That was always a thing. But with the rise of agile and iterative software development processes, which, agile came out as this great concept like, hey, maybe we should start paying attention to quality as opposed to all these dogmatic processes. And of course, companies, corporations, managers, executives heard fast. And they were like, okay, that means we don't have to document stuff. We could just go fast. I know some people on the design and development side who made those excuses as well. Like we can just charge ahead blindly and go faster and get stuff out faster. And not such a good thing, overall. But that's a radical change. Okay. The pressure to do more with less in less time has never been greater than it has been before. There's a myriad of players now in software development that were never there before. I mean, way early on, this was a purview of you had UI designers and you had copywriters to some degree, but they weren't really involved in software. And then you had developers and IT folks, programmers. And the bulk of all that work was being done by IT and programmers. And we were sort of on the periphery. We've played a larger role, but some of those, what's the word I want? Conventional ways of thinking, some of those bad habits, some of those cliches about how this is supposed to be done, some of the dogma around how this is supposed to be done has persisted. So I think our job has gotten harder in a lot of ways. And I think what's overcomplicated it is kind of what you and I were talking a little bit about at the beginning, which is go online right now and you're going to see all these wonderful UX process diagrams. And you're going to read books and see courses and watch YouTube videos about the UX process and boot camps and all this shit that is perfect world fantasy land. When everything goes perfectly right, here's the work you'll be able to do. I think none of that exists. And I think that we as a profession have sort of ignored that for a very long time as a whole. So the reason for the second edition, the reason for the change was to say, okay, look, the foundation of this book is still incredibly solid. Those methods are still incredibly solid. They need a little bit of tweaking. There are some things that had to go away completely because they're just not going to fly. There's no time or interest for people around you and your team or executives to play along with you. And there was a whole host of new challenges, again, about title conflation, about how what we do is misunderstood, about the greater need to sort of evangelize for ourselves and toot our own horns to some degree, the emphasis on value versus design and UX, right? The need to speak the language of business. All those things I think have ramped up exponentially in the last decade. And I think we all felt like, and I certainly felt like that stuff needed a greater presence in this book to make it as valuable today as it was when it came out. But I have to say again, I mean, the foundation, what Leah started with and her approach, which is a very kind, generous, no bullshit, practical approach, again, was the reason I felt like, yeah, this is a good thing to do. People need this book without question.
Yes, people do need this book. I'm not just saying that because you're here. I regularly will pull it out and kind of peruse the pages for some inspiration, for
Yeah.
some validation, and just therapy in a way sometimes when I'm like, why? What's wrong? Anyway, but Joe, you mentioned a little bit about evangelizing UX. There's pros and cons to that. There's still, after how many years UX has been on the scene, there's still so much confusion around what it does, what value we bring.
Yep.
What do you recommend people do to showcase or show that value?
Here's where I get myself into trouble. This is partly our fault. Okay. Has everything to do with the way we talk about our own profession. We have set ourselves up as the heroes of the story, which, look, in a way we are, right? I mean, our job is to advocate for human beings. I always say job one in this profession is to care about human beings. That's a noble thing. It's a good thing. It's a powerful thing. It's a necessary thing. However, it goes back to, again, the beginning of this conversation. You can't be anti everything else. It doesn't work. The game that you are playing is played by rules that are not dictated by you, by us. When you go to work for a corporation, you're outnumbered in any number of ways. Okay. Number one, I say this all the time, and people look at me kind of sideways. Users don't pay your salary. A business
That's a
does.
good point.
Okay. Users didn't decide to hire you. That business did. And the reason that they hired you, the reason they're giving you a paycheck every 2 weeks is to serve their interests. If you believe anything else, you're deluding yourself. Now, before anybody gets the idea that this is cynicism, it is not. It's an acknowledgement of reality. In order to transcend the limitations of what are around you, in order to get past constraints, in order to get past short-term business gain thinking, you have to be able to speak to those things. You have to be able to speak a language that people outside your profession look at you and go, okay, you get it. As a consultant, those are the 3 words I want to hear most. When a client says to me, you get it. That's what I want, because now I'm in a position to influence. What that means, all those 3 words mean, is that you understand their world. And that's because I'm almost never talking about UX or UX best practices or product design best practices or any of that stuff. I'm trying to figure out, what do they want? From product managers to developers to managers and executives, all the way up the chain. What do they want? Business first, users second. That's my thing. Because if what I'm proposing that does in fact benefit users and customers, if it's not in line, if there isn't some component of that gets that person what they want, or at least says to them, we heard you too. Okay. We're absolutely advocating for customers' use, but I listened to you. I understand what you're after. I know what you need to accomplish. I know what you're on the hook for. I know what your quarterly bonus is dependent on, whatever the hell it is. I'm going to make sure that we attack that stuff as well. If they hear that, they relax. The trust factor goes up when they feel like I'm advocating for their interests as well. Otherwise, it comes across as, well, no, we're doing this for users. Like, you're wrong about this. And no, that's not what's needed. It's this. Look, like it, don't like it, I don't care. You're not going to get anywhere. That's an uphill battle that you are never going to end. People say to me all the time, well, I'll die on that hill. Yeah, you will. You will.
You will.
So at the end of the day, it goes back to what we were talking about before. You have to make a decision. If you truly want to do good things for good people, you have got to acknowledge this part of the game, and it has to be part of what you do. So the stuff that comes out of your mouth can't just be promoting good UX and good product design and good research and good, writing and everything else. It's got to be, I understand what you're after, Mr. Mrs. Product Manager or VP of product or whoever. I get it. I'm with you. Your problems are my problems. Your goals are my goals. Along the way, we're also going to do these things, which I believe will serve your goals. Okay. I relentlessly advocate for users and customers, but I frame it in a way that those people understand why it's happening, that they're willing to keep that budget open, that they're willing to spend more money to make it happen. I learned this over time. Okay. 30 years on, there is no other way. And I learned it the hard way, mind you. I don't sit here saying all this because I'm omnipotent and I know everything. I say it because I've had my nose broken dozens of times. Yeah, and finally you wise up and go, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I hear
So
you.
that's the reason.
Yeah, it makes
That's what
sense.
we
I will share a quick story. I was a UX team of one. Was the first UX hire, bunch of engineers, security analyst company kind of thing. And they're like, "Yeah, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Let me put this nice presentation together, tell you all about UX and all the magic and all the good stuff. And I'll even talk about how I'll save development hours and how my research can inform your direction and save you
sure.
time for rework." Sounded great. Oh, it looked great. I loved it. And I shit you not, right after, it was just a small group of a dozen or so people. Right after, one of the head of the team of the engineers was like, "Yeah, so what do you do?" It completely fell flat.
Yep.
I literally had just given a 45-minute presentation on what I do, and the first question is, "So what do you do?"
And there you go. It's a perfect example. Perfect example. Okay, many years ago, I started saying that anything I do for a client, right, when I'm working with a client's team, I want engineers and developers in the room at all times. At all times. Okay. Not just design, not just UX, not just all times. And people are like, well, why? I'll tell you, I mean, it was after a lot of that, essentially. Okay. So this was probably 15 years ago, at least, if not longer. Because what I discovered was this. If we're in a room and we're working on a whiteboard, which is my only tool to this day, if we're iterating, right, we're working through workflows and then we're jumping between workflows and okay, maybe that manifests on the screen like this based on what the research we have so far and testing tells us that we need this, this, and this. So we're iterating, right? Quick workflow, draw it out, interface, maybe sequence can work like this. What I want is I want an engineer sitting in that room for two reasons. Number one, so that they're an active participant in the process, right? So that they're making decisions and we're leveraging their expertise as well. And that they can sort of get a sense of what the hell we're doing here, that we're not off working in a vacuum, doing some esoteric thing. Number two, that person is usually sitting there prototyping really roughly, like with modules, with code, with platform, whatever. And they're saying, we draw something and say, what do you think? He's like, well, I've been sitting here for the last 5 minutes. I did a rough prototype and here's what I think. We don't have anything that works like this, but we have this module that works like this. And I'll turn it around and show it to me. I think we can customize this, 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 and this. What do you think? How far does that get us? And I'm like, absolutely do it. That's 75% of what we wanted. But I'm going to take that 75% and go right now because I know otherwise we're going to spend the next 6 weeks screwing around with it and it's going to go nowhere. So we just eliminated 6 weeks of work in a span of 15 minutes. They understand that. They appreciate that. And they're going to carry it forward, and their managers are going to understand it and appreciate it. And the VPs are going to understand it and appreciate it. Okay. So now people understand what UX is. To do this, what's worth doing in the first place? What gets us to here's what the people on the receiving end need from us, and here's what we need internally to pull it off. Weeks of research. If you're not going to get it, you got to do something else. Right. And I think, again, the longer there are silos, the more the problem you just described exists. People don't understand what you do because they're not present for it. And what they think it is and what it really is are two completely different things. And when they finally see what it really is, they're like, oh, I had no idea that's what you do.
Yeah, like you
You
just show
know?
up and here's the deliverable. Voila!
Yeah.
So
And I
go
think
from
we're resistant to that to some degree as well. I mean, designers in general, it's like you don't want somebody looking over your shoulder, but this is not that.
right.
Right? Like I hate the whole agile thing where design is 2 weeks ahead of development. I mean, why? So everybody can be surprised every 2 weeks? Design's looking at development like, why did you build it like this? And development's going, why would you design this way? Because there's no way I can build that in the time allotted that we have. So that's what happens. Every 2 weeks, everybody's surprised at what the other party did. And I'm
Yeah,
going, okay, bullshit. How about the two of you work together all day,
yeah,
every day? Remote teams,
yeah,
I don't care. Get on Zoom or Teams or whatever a couple times a day and compare notes. I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Yes, no, maybe. Well, you're kind of painting me into a corner there because A, B, C, and D. I
Yeah.
mean, my God, we still stick to these dogmatic processes and it doesn't help anything.
Yeah. It
It's
really,
misunderstanding on both sides.
I agree. The example you just gave, having that developer in that conversation, giving you a little bit of scope and constraints and understanding of what's possible and what's not, completely shifted in a direction that's closer to a solution.
Yes.
Where if you were off sketching by yourself, I personally think this is a huge flaw of UX design is going off and coming up with these blue sky dreamy ideas with zero constraints. What's the damn point of that?
It's a holdover. It's a holdover from, again, all these idealistic ideas about how this work is supposed to happen. And maybe there was a time when that worked. It's not like that anymore. I mean, there isn't time, number one. Companies are not willing to invest that kind of time. Number two, nobody understands it. Number three, Agile's conditioned everybody to be like proof right now at all times. Proof of work every second of the day. Again, we can lament that all we want. It is. It exists. So you either find a way to deal with it or you keep getting beat up. And like I told you, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, that's where I was beat up all the time. I'm like, this is insane. Like something has to change. I was so frustrated. I threw everything out the window and said, screw it. I'm just going to sit down with these folks and we're going to dig through it together. I don't care how it happened, right? I just literally had to let go of everything, all these rules and processes and whatever. And I started taking pieces of things that I thought were smart from all sorts of disciplines and said, all right, I'm going to start doing that and mashing them together and trying to come up with different ways to do things so that in any given situation, you have a number of ways to approach something. I have a government client right now. It's one of the most challenging projects I've ever worked on in my entire life. But there are a lot of smart people working on this project, and they all have very different ideas about how to tackle something. And it's one of the greatest things in that everybody is sort of volunteering their piece and nobody is precious about their part. So we're making a lot of headway in a very short period of time simply because no one is saying, well, this is the process. Who gives a shit? Are we making progress or not? These are big problems and they're important problems because this project in particular does really affect human beings. And so it matters. The stakes are pretty high. And I love the fact that we're getting there. And the way we're getting there is by nobody saying, well, our world works like this, and you should adhere to what we believe is gospel. Doesn't work.
Yeah. There's a lot of territorialism from all sides
Yeah.
when it comes to building products and solutions.
Yeah. And it comes from fear. All of it. All of it. You're afraid that you're not being respected. You're afraid that your profession isn't being seen as legitimate. That's where all that stuff starts to me. And that's okay. It's understandable. I do think historically designers and UXers and researchers especially are marginalized a lot, are disrespected, are considered to be, well, you guys are the fluffy whatever. I get that. It's not right, but you got to
Yeah.
do something to counter it.
I think that's fair. I've been guilty of that person in a lot of my roles, the PM or POs, like, hey, I don't have time to sit in with your research. I approve it. You go do it. You come back. You show up and you throw up the results. And there's been res- mixed feelings about that, right? If it's something simple, like a usability test or concept test, okay, great. This worked or this didn't. But when it's deeper, talking about people's true beliefs or motivations, then I've had this circumstance where they're like, well, why didn't you ask this and this and this? And I'm like, well, if you were there in the interview with me, I could have probed deeper on that.
Right.
But
Right.
it's over now.
Right. Right. Exactly. And there's no, I mean, looking back again, hindsight is a waste of time. You look back to say, what could I have done differently? That's fine.
Yeah.
Because you should always be learning. But beating yourself up about it is crazy.
I think that's
So
key. Learning from the past. I can remember one of my first research efforts, it was ethnographic. I was going into animal hospitals and shadowing doctors because
Hmm.
I was designing their software that they used, medical records, booking appointments, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I brought all these notes back, typed them all up, gave them to my product owner, and he was like, "What am I supposed to do with this?" And I'm like, "Read it." And he's
Right.
like,
No.
"Was there anything you saw that I should particularly know or anything that stood out to you?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." He's like, "Well, what are they?" And I'm like, "Well, they're in the notes." I was such an asshole. I was so naive. I thought they're going to want to see everything.
Right.
And some people are like that. And he was like, "No, what were the big moments that
Right. Give me the
we
summary.
should?" And I was like, "Oh, really?"
It's an amazing story. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay. At least once a week. I'm not kidding you. At least once a week. I have a conversation with somebody who's a researcher, and this is either a coaching client or it's someone on a client's team, someone online, someone in my DMs who's a researcher. And they're saying, well, they want a research report and they want my findings and they want all my stuff and they want all this detail. And I give it to them, and their reaction is what you just described. Either it's, well, so what do I do with this? Or it's ignored, right? And it's not used and no one references it or ever pays attention to it again as if it didn't exist. And you're like, well, I don't understand why this is. This has everything to do with framing. Okay. The assumption, because again, we've been taught this is the way you do research. This is the right way to put rigor and all this kind of stuff. And we assume that everyone gives a shit as much as we do. Untrue. What any manager or executive wants to know is, okay, great. What does this mean for me? What should I do? What should we or should not do? Where should we explore? What does it mean? So I tell people all the time, like, you need a page one that says, here's what we learned. Here's what I think it means. Here's what I think we should do as a result. And then here's
Yeah.
what outcome it either prevents or enables. Okay. You're essentially saying, especially to people at a higher level, like VPs, executives, look, I know you're placing this bet regardless, with or without this information. I think that if we do it this way, if we make sure that we at least answer these questions, that bet's a lot less risky for you. You're mitigating risk to some degree and saying, I can help you make a better, more educated, not educated, I hate that word, informed decision that is less likely to blow up in your face and more likely to give you a return on that investment. That's how you frame it. If they read the rest of it, hey, awesome, especially if they're asking for it. There are a lot of people in management positions who want these big reports. Everybody knows damn well no one's reading it. So page one
Yeah,
has got to be that summary I just talked about. It's these things. Give away the ending first. Here's what
for
this means
sure.
for you. And that's
Don't
it.
bury the lead.
Right. Never, never, never. And we've been taught to do it the opposite way. People do it in
We
their
have.
case studies online. The
Yes.
payoff is at the end. Like, I'm not reading all that shit. And a
Yeah.
recruiter who's staring down a stack of 100 people or 100 things they have to review today is sure as hell not reading it. You got 30 seconds. Give me the ending of the story. I think just about every part of this profession, anytime we're in front of somebody who's not us, that's the deal. You got to cut to the chase. What does this help this person, this organization be or do or have? And you got to lead with
Yes,
that first. It's the only way you have any leg up. It's the only way anyone's going to listen to anything you say after that.
I agree. As a researcher who has done a lot of that traditional report writing, I am now like, put that method in the appendix. No one gives a shit unless they
Correct.
question it.
Correct.
Now, you
Cover your
might have to
ass, right?
yes, you might have to say who you talk to if it's very specific that
Yeah.
is important to the findings. But it count of and interviews done on this platform, like no one cares. You care. You might want to remember it later. Appendix a great spot for that.
Amen. You're absolutely right.
And
Absolutely
it's
right.
been hard. It's been hard to learn that. And now I'm making my team. I peer review everyone's reports. I'm like,
Yeah.
put in the appendix. And they're like, I know you're going to say that. I'm like, well, then don't do it. Don't do it. Put it back there.
Yeah. Like I said, every once in a while I get a thing with, well, that's easy for you to say. Well, it isn't. Okay. I learned all this, like I said, the hard way.
Yes.
There's no easy about it. And there are some parts of this that I don't personally agree with. Again, it doesn't matter. What I like doesn't matter. What is matters. You
Yeah,
suffer
that's
when you don't deal with what is and when you're fixated on what should be. What a waste
yes.
of time and energy and emotion.
Right. Rigor doesn't have to be your output of your report. That's not where the value of research rigor is.
No. And again, that's all the things that show up, hopefully, in everything that I do. And I think it shows up in this book as well. That's the overriding mantra. Get real, deal
Yeah.
with what is, pivot, flex. The world's not going to be the way you want it to be. It just isn't. Doesn't mean you
True.
can't do good work. Doesn't mean you can't help people. Doesn't mean you can't do good things.
Yeah. I have had the opportunity where I was put on a project, kind of a consultancy basis, and I can't even remember redesigning some internal tool or something. And I gave them a menu. Here's a short list of research efforts that take this much time, and we will learn this. Here's a medium effort that's a little bit longer, a few more things that we could learn, and maybe some different methods or additional methods to the small, and a large, which will take a long time, will get us closer to confidence, sure, but it takes longer. So, what works? Because how much can you move forward with the
Yeah,
unknown?
I love that. I love it. It's an
And having a
acknowledgement of
conversation
reality.
around, yeah,
It's an acknowledgement of reality. It's options. It's flexibility. It's saying, all right, there are a number of ways we could go about doing this. That's smart. I mean, I totally agree. And I think that nobody talks enough about that kind of approach.
yeah. Well, I learned it the kind of the hard way because I
Right.
had, I came up with a plan. And my manager's like, "Oh yeah, I don't know about that. This is like a 3-month engagement, and you want a whole month on just like discovery research. I don't know that we're going to be able to do that. So, what are some other options to make sure we can give them some value in this short time span?" I'm like, "All right,
Yeah.
let me think about it. Maybe I don't interview 10 people, I interview 2, right? And what risk would there be only in interviewing 2 people over 10?"
Right. And if that's all you can do, that's all you can do.
Right.
What's funny to me is that I think this is a social media thing. In the social media age, a lot of this fiction is so pervasive that people actually don't believe real life stories often when you put them out there. This has happened to me a couple times. There's one post in particular that LinkedIn that got an unbelievable amount of ire. And it was basically, I was working with this team and they wanted like a week or 2 weeks of research and they just weren't going to get it. Management said, look, we'll give you whatever you can accomplish in 8 hours. Like, this is it. All right. And these are all internal users. So I said to these folks, look, you got 8 hours, split it up into 15-minute increments. How many people can you talk to in 15-minute increments? And then we'll use the time, we'll print out transcripts, we'll sit down, and each person will go through all of them literally with a red marker and circle the commonalities. What comes up in every interview? Is this perfect? No, it's not perfect. But it's what we can do. It's the most ground we can cover in a very short, incredibly compressed period of time. And that's what we did. And a lot of it worked. Okay. A lot of it solved the problem at hand. A lot of it stopped the bleeding that was occurring in some areas. And that's all I wanted. People lost their minds when I posted this story. That's not real research. Rah, 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 rah. And it happened. What do you want me to tell you? What should we have done there? Should I have told this entire team, well, just then sit on your hands and do nothing? If you can't do it this way, then we're not doing anything. Who would that help? It wouldn't help that team. It would make them look like obstinate troublemakers to everybody else. It wouldn't help the business because none of these problems would get solved. It also wouldn't help users who were suffering and struggling because nothing would have gotten done that was worth doing. So what's the point of this? Right? I don't understand where this comes from, but it makes me absolutely crazy. And it's like I said, it just seems like the more realistic the story, people are like, that's not true.
Yeah. Everybody's a critic, right?
Yeah. And I mean, look, I've been inside the walls of some companies who are professed to be very human-centered design driven, UX driven. They're not. They're as dysfunctional as every other corporation I have ever walked into. The constraints are the same, the problems are the same. The degree to which UX and research and product design work is, like I said, marginalized, misunderstood, underutilized, is the same as everywhere else. By and large, people don't realize that they can get more from you than what you're doing. They don't realize that you have more value to offer them and that you can further their own goals quite a lot further than they know. And part of that is making sure that you communicate that in a way where they understand it, right? And demonstrating that in a way where they can understand it. And a big part of that, I know we've been talking about this for a long time, but a lot of that is letting go of all this dogma, of all this language, of all this code that we speak in, of all this mystery that we insist on shrouding our profession in. Again, back to the book, back to my courses, the stuff I post on LinkedIn, whatever. It's all, let's just get down to reality and try to put things out into the world that makes sense to people and not just our people, to everybody. I think that's the only
Yeah,
way we move forward.
but Joe, these words, they make us look fancy.
Again, I understand that. It's legitimacy, it's professionalism, and part of it is just a holdover from, I think in every profession, there's an element of that, right? Where there's the thing of like, well, if to be seen as a professional, you use this language, right? And you make sure you say things in this way. And that has been a thing since the beginning of time, probably, right? Language has power, and we attribute some sort of level of respect to certain ways of doing things. Look at academic research writing, for example. I mean, look at the rules that surround creating an academic paper or medical research paper or any sorts of very formalized standards and processes in various parts of different industries. It exists because there's a stigma around what it means to be operating at this level. However, there's a very limited pool of people who can take that information and find it useful. And if that's your job and you only serve a niche audience, I suppose that's fine. When you're serving the larger, broader community as a whole, clients, customers, coworkers, executives, bosses, that's a different thing altogether. Okay. What you need most for your own sake, for the sake of your own career trajectory, is to be understood. If you are not understood, it doesn't matter how professional or how formal you are. If nobody understands what the hell you're talking about, it does nothing to elevate your standing in their eyes. It does nothing to elevate their level of respect for you or trust or understanding or sense of wanting to collaborate with you. They need to understand you, which means whatever comes out of your mouth or whatever gets put on paper needs to be such that every single person you come in contact with, no matter what their background is, can understand what the hell you're talking about. Period. Right?
And
So
not using fancy jargon, you
yeah,
know,
like I said, I
mind
get
map,
it. It's second
mental
nature
model.
and it's second nature to some degree. I get it. I mean, I've been guilty of it myself. It's something I actively work to counter, especially when I'm talking to clients from the prospect stage all the way through. I say all the time, I don't even use the word UX if I can help it. I really don't. You keep the focus on what are we trying to accomplish? What do we need to know? And what do we need to do to figure that out? Or once we know what we're going to do, okay, great. How do we go about doing it? I just personally think it's a better way.
Makes sense completely. Now, Joe, we talked about a lot of things, not just themes that are in the book.
From the minute.
Because I do a lot of what you talked about is touched upon in the book. So, I guess my next question to you is, there was just so much good stuff here with Joe that I'm going to have to break this interview into two parts. Sorry, not sorry. Go ahead and check out the second half of this.
fantastic interview.